So I want to apply that same concept that we just looked at of set driver, set driven to the body of my rocket. And I'll do this pretty fast. I want to identify the thing that I want to move and the axis that I want to move it along. So that's the y-axis. The cap will be the first object that I want to animate. And I'm just gonna select that object. I'm going to go to the coordinates manager. I'm going to identify the y position value. And I'll right click on the actual y. I'll go to animation and I'll set driver. Once we've set driver, Cinema 4D is looking for you to set driven to kind of complete this process. And so I'm going to go to body 2, which is the next element down. I'm going to go to the coordinate tab, the position Y, right click, animation, and I'm going to set driven relative. And I'm just going to keep going through. I'm going to go to body 3. I'm going to go to Y and right click. And I want to set this as driven relative as well. And then so the idea is I'm going to run through all of these and set them all as driven. So I have one driver and everything else is driven. So I'm going to select body 4, the coordinate tab, looking for Y, set driven relative, body 5, and I'll do the same thing. And if I goof this up along the way, I can just delete. If I click on the wrong thing, I can delete the Expresso tag that has popped up and reapply the set driven. Now the key is that Cinema 4D remembers the last driver that you've set. So from now on, anything that I set as driven is going to correspond with the driving object. I can have more than one driver in a scene, but only one object can drive. So the drivers have to be unique to the driven. So in other words, I could set my cap to my booster as a driver as well, but it can't drive the same element that's being driven by another driver, if that makes sense. So I've set all of my driven. They're all driven relative, and so the result that I should get is when I move the cap, they all move like a group or a parent object, and that's because there is no variation in terms of the proportion with which they move one object to the next based on the relative driven, but I'm about to change that. If I double click on the first Expresso tag and select the range mapper node, that will bring up the attributes manager, and I'm looking for, in the parameters section, the output upper. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to reduce the value, and it's relative to the overall value or scale that I'm working in. So I'm just going to experiment here, and I'm going to say I want to reduce this value by 10 units. Now I could do the math in my head and say 715.262 will become 705, and I'll hit return, and I'm going to test that value. So I'll select cap and I'll move cap up, and I can see that that is starting to pull away nicely. Okay, so the cap is moving a little bit faster, and so the value of 10 appears to work just fine. So the value of 10, I want to increment the value of 10. So on body 2, I've reduced that by 10. By body 3, I want to reduce that by an additional 10, so I'll have 20. Okay, so I'm going to go and just double click my Expresso tag, select my range mapper, and I want to reduce this by negative, or I want to subtract 20 from this, so I could do the math manually and just make a 575. I'll make it 555. Okay. Now, once I gain confidence in this process, I don't have to test it each time, but I'm just kind of pulling that away, and I see that those kind of disproportionately moving along the y-axis, and that's exactly what I want. So this next one, the range mapper, is going to be minus 30. Okay, so rather than actually manually doing the math in my head, I'll just type in minus 30 in the output upper and hit return. Cinema 4D does the math for me. Okay, so this next one's going to be 40. So I'll just select the range mapper, minus 40, hit return, move to the next value, double click, range mapper. I'll find the output upper and I'll subtract 50. So 10, 20, 30, 40. This one's 50, which makes this one 60. I'll go here, subtract 60, hit return. If I did that right, I should be able to move the cap object. I'll just zoom out, and everything should move at a slower rate. Okay, so now as I pull that apart, my rocket model starts to explode, And so now the task of animating becomes much easier because I only have one object to manage with just a couple of keyframes. And so I'll advance the playhead 30 frames. With the cap selected, I'll mark that first keyframe. I'm going to advance, let's say, out to 90, just like our previous animation. I'm going to pull that apart. I'm not really paying attention to what the value is, but I'll mark the keyframe. I remember the issue that I ran into last time was I had to duplicate that keyframe, so this time I'll emulate that by scrubbing the playhead out, let's say to frame 150. I'll mark that keyframe, advance this to the end of time, and move the cap back to its original position. Now I forgot to mark that last keyframe before I animated, so I got a little bit of an issue here. I don't remember exactly what the position of that cap was to get started with, and if I'm off just a little bit, I'm not going to have a perfect loop. So I have a couple of choices. My first choice is that I could duplicate the first keyframe and move it down to the end of time, but because I'm only dealing with one element, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrub the playhead back to frame 30. I'm going to select the cap. I'm going to see what the Y value is, and it's 754. It's not a real easy number to remember, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to Command-C to copy it. I'll advance the playhead to frame 150 where I already have a keyframe. I'm going to double-click and just paste that value that I've copied. That reassembles or forces the cap back to its original position, and I'll mark that keyframe. And now I should have that very same animation that I created previously, but it's all driven by one object with one set of keyframes. Okay, so I goofed that up a little bit because I actually wanted to preserve the position from 90 to 50. So not a problem. I'll just fix this very quickly. What I'm looking for is at the end of time, I want to record a keyframe for the cap, and I want frame 90 and frame 150 to be exactly the same. So I'm going to go to frame 90. I'm going to take a look at what the cap's Y position is, and I'll copy that value. I'll Command-C to copy. I'll go to frame 150. I'll Command-V to paste that value. I'll hit return to apply it, and I'll record the keyframe or update that position. And so what I get then is I get this more or less maintaining its position between frame 90 and 150. Again, I have that very same issue of needing to correct for the clamp of that spline interpolation, and because I'm only dealing with one object with two keyframes, this is really simple. I'll select that first keyframe. In the Attributes Manager, I'll check to clamp. I'll do the same thing with frame 150. I'll clamp, and now I'm still getting a little bit of a float in there, and that suggests that I have a different value for Y at frame 90. When I select the cap, I'll just take a look at this. Maybe I accidentally pasted the wrong value. It looks about the same, so maybe I goofed up one of the clamps. I'll have to take a deeper dive into this and see exactly what's kind of throwing me off. And I may need to pluck one of these keyframes out of the equation, but I'm not going to let it slow me down too much. I'm pretty happy with my animation. So I'll hit play, take a look at it. It explodes and goes back together. I like it. So I'm going to take this concept, and whether I choose to use the set drive or set driven and build a really complex relationship with my model and just move one thing, or whether I want to manually animate this thing, I'll leave it up to you on how you want to solve this. I will post at least one more tip or trick, which is just kind of taking a little bit deeper of a dive into the set driver, set driven relationship, and I'll do that in one more presentation. But I think you got the basic nuts and bolts of how to start assembling the exploded view presentation. So make sure that as you move forward with this project, you're posting your works in progress and any questions that you have in the discussion board. Have fun with this project. This is the last project for this class. So have fun with it. Make a really great portfolio piece. Don't be afraid to put it in a post-production environment, something like iMovie or Premiere or After Effects, and apply maybe a little bit of sound if you feel so compelled. Maybe you have multiple clips happening and you want to edit those together. Again, the goal is to make a portfolio piece I'll push this forward offline, and I'll post some of my works in progress in the discussion board as we go as well. And again, if you have any questions, post in the discussion board, and have fun with this project.